Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got something really fascinating to unpack today. We're going to be breaking down a hugely popular and honestly very strongly worded thesis from a YouTube commentary channel called Liberal Hive Mind. Now, whether you follow politics super closely or you just kind of catch the headlines in passing, you've definitely noticed that the political landscape feels more polarized than ever. Well, today we're taking a completely objective look at a very specific argument regarding the modern political left. We're going to systematically unpack the source's claims, examine the evidence they present, and look at their ultimate predictions for the future of Western politics. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Right out of the gate, we're looking at a pretty massive juxtaposition. On one side, you have the mainstream narrative. This is the idea you've probably heard repeated on loop over the last decade, that it's the political right moving further and further out to the fringes. But the source material we're analyzing today flips that entirely on its head. The core thesis of the commentary is that this widely accepted narrative is actually backwards. The video argues that it is literally the left that's pushing further and further into extreme territory. The entire breakdown we're mapping out today is built squarely on this specific, exact opposite counter-narrative.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the extreme shift thesis. Then, founders leaving the movement. Third, echo chambers and alienation. Fourth, performative politics in action, and we will wrap up with the looming generational backlash. Let's start right at the beginning with Section 1, the extreme shift thesis, and how the source is redefining the political fringe. The commentary kicks things off by painting a highly specific picture of modern, far-left progressives. According to the source, factions within this movement, like democratic socialists and some of the more vocal progressive leaders, are operating under a massive misconception. They loudly claim to represent the true majority of the party. They speak as if it's really just a matter of time before they completely control the levers of power. But the video asserts that reality is actually doing the exact opposite. Instead of building these broad, winning coalitions, the commentary observes that these factions are isolating themselves. By utterly refusing to compromise, the argument is that they're on a crash course to becoming a fringe cringe party, something the general public wants absolutely nothing to do with.
Moving right along to Section 2, founders leaving the movement. We're going to look at the Australian Green Party as a prime case study here.
To prove just how extreme this shift has become, the source points to a pretty staggering high-profile departure. We're talking about the founder of the Australian Green Party. This is a person who spent over 30 years as their leading spokesperson. He literally wrote the party's policies. And yet, he reluctantly concluded that he had to walk away from his own life's work. Why? Because in his own words, the party had moved completely away from what it was set up to be. For the source, this high-profile exit is a glaring red flag. The logic is simple. If a political movement has gone so far off the rails that its own creators can't even recognize it anymore, well, that's a movement in deep, deep trouble.
So you might be wondering, who exactly has taken over these movements to drive the original founders away? The commentary lays out a very clear demographic profile of the new base that supposedly captured these progressive parties. The video portrays them as existing in this highly insulated cultural bubble. Demographically, they're described as youngish, university-educated, and primarily living in the suburban rings of major cities. But here's the real kicker, and the reason the source claims they alienate the broader public: it's a fundamental lack of empathy for ordinary citizens. The argument suggests that this group has economic security and a lot of cultural influence, but they hold a worldview that actively disdains the working class or the average, everyday voter. Let's transition over to Section 3, echo chambers and alienation, to explore the actual mechanism driving this extremism.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the source views the strategy, or honestly, the total lack of strategy used by this faction. In normal politics, it's a numbers game, right? You draft policy that speaks to average people's concerns. But the modern far left, according to the video, does the exact opposite by obsessively focusing on what they call 80-20 issues. These are highly unpopular positions where 80% of the public completely disagrees with them. The example the video highlights is the fierce opposition to voter ID laws. Instead of moderating their stance, this faction stubbornly and arrogantly chooses to just die on the damn hill. It's characterized as this almost disgustingly self-righteous strategy that totally ignores public sentiment.
But why? Why would a political group intentionally alienate voters? Well, the source points to this exact three-step mechanism, the reinforcement loop. First, individuals sequester themselves inside strict social media bubbles. The video specifically calls out platforms like Blue Sky and Reddit. Second, this creates intense ideological isolationism. They make a concerted effort to never venture outside their highly curated feeds. And finally, this results in a super dangerous false consensus. Because they're huddled together in a digital space where literally everyone agrees with them, they genuinely believe their fringe ideas are widely popular. They think they are the smartest people in the room, while the rest of society is just watching them like a bizarre science experiment.
Which brings us to Section 4, Performative Politics in Action, where we're looking at a very specific Canadian political convention.
To further illustrate this total disconnect from reality, the video brings up a viral anecdote from a far-left Canadian political convention. Okay, picture this. Initially, there was a completely standard pro-con-pro rotation for speakers at the microphones. Standard procedure. But then, a delegate interrupts the entire process by playing a literal gender equity card to cut the line. And immediately after that, another delegate jumps in to challenge that interruption by calling a point of privilege, arguing over the appropriate use of equity cards based on intersecting identities. Instead of an actual political debate, it instantly turned into a bureaucratic traffic jam. The source presents this moment not just as a funny, disorganized mess, but as a perfect snapshot of a political movement entirely lost in its own esoteric rules. And this brilliantly illustrates the source's harsh rhetorical conclusion regarding modern performative politics. The commentator looks at events, like that chaotic convention mic cue, and dismisses the entire culture as pseudo-intellectualism run amok. The argument here is that instead of actually solving real-world problems for everyday citizens, these groups are just exercising power complexes. They're just pretending to be part of some grand revolution. By obsessing over microaggressions and privilege points, the source concludes that this has become, in their exact words, the most vapid and pretentious political movement ever seen on the planet.
All right, that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the looming generational backlash. What does all of this mean for the future?
The source makes a super bold prediction here regarding Gen Z and the generation coming up right behind them. The argument goes like this: because these young people are growing up completely surrounded by what the source calls a woke dystopian culture, meaning they are frequently exposed firsthand to concepts like non-binary identities and even furries in their schools. They aren't actually embracing it. Instead, they are experiencing a massive grassroots backlash effect. The commentary claims to be hearing directly from 19 and 20-year-olds who are just totally exhausted by this culturally subversive environment. Because of this, the video predicts these younger generations will increasingly abandon the left-wing movement, bleeding support at the exact same time that right-wing coalitions are actively growing across the Western world. So the crucial point is, the source believes that while the far left is operating under the delusion that they're on the verge of total cultural revolution, reality tells a very, very different story. According to this commentary, the current iteration of far leftism is just completely unsustainable. By alienating their founders, ignoring the working class, living inside these digital echo chambers, and triggering a massive youth backlash, they definitely aren't marching toward victory. Instead, they are on the verge of smashing into a massive brick wall.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought. We've explored the source's entire thesis today, from the alienated founders to those performative conventions, all the way down to the echo chambers. But the absolute linchpin of their prediction rests on the reaction of the youth. Is a massive Gen Z political backlash truly inevitable? Will the extreme overreach of one political faction automatically breed a massive pendulum swing in the exact opposite direction? It's a fascinating question about the mechanics of modern politics, and it's definitely one you should keep in the back of your mind as you watch the political landscape unfold over the coming years. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking great questions, and I'll catch you next time.